Well, hi everyone. I'm recording this video on May 1st, 2026. Thanks to an anonymous source, I have a lot of great information that I can present to you that I believe illustrates the underlying cause of this parapet wall collapse, this partial bridge collapse onto active Amtrak tracks in Cranston, Rhode Island, that happened the evening of Friday, April 24th, 2026. And as of the date of this recording, state officials, in particular RIDOT, has not provided any explanation as to the cause of this partial bridge collapse. Again, as a quick reminder, we have this Route 10 North ramp to I-95 North, just south of Providence, Rhode Island. And this is what I received from the anonymous source. This shows a detail of a parapet wall, and they indicated that this is in fact the detail that was used for the parapet wall during the construction of this ramp bridge in 1965. So I'll have to say off the top, this drawing detail did not come from official sources. RIDOT to date has not provided this information to the public, but it looks completely consistent with the photos that you see before and after this parapet wall collapse on this bridge. Also, the type of Leroy lettering that was done to produce this drawing is consistent with the types of drawings that would be produced back in the 1960s. So those of you who may not be familiar with that, the engineers used to take ink on a drawing arm on a big drawing table and handwrite all of these characters, all these letters, and hand draw the drawing details. So we can see immediately some really important indicators as to what caused this wall collapse just by looking at this detail. And the most important aspect of this, I think, is this connection between the bridge deck and the parapet wall, this piece of reinforcing steel. Now, the drawing detail has a code of 5F053 at 12 inches. And again, thanks to the source, they clarified, if you're not familiar with drawing notes for reinforcing steel, it means a number 5 bar, which is 5/8 of an inch in diameter, so 0.625 inches in diameter, so relatively small. The bar's 5 foot 3 inches long, and it's spaced every 12 inches along the length of the wall. So every 12 inches, there's one of these bars. And the F is the shape designation for the bends of the bar. So if you go back to this drawing detail, what I surmise from looking at the post-collapse photos, there appeared to be a very smooth surface left behind after this parapet wall fell over the side of the bridge onto the Amtrak lines. And you could see how this would have been constructed. This bar would have first been cast in with the bridge deck, and then the parapet wall would have been formed up with the reinforcing steel installed, and then the concrete placed inside those forms. So the parapet wall was constructed after the bridge deck was constructed. Anyone out there during construction would have observed a bar sticking out of the previously placed bridge deck that was tied in to the subsequently placed concrete for the parapet wall. So that represents a single connection between the parapet wall and the bridge deck. Again, going through these photos, you see a very smooth post-wall failure contact that's left behind. This arrow points to just above the portion of the wall where part of it is overhanging the bridge and the other part is supported by the bridge deck. So a big section of this wall is what you would call cantilevered over the side of the bridge deck. And this cantilever portion from this 2025 photo indicates extensive corrosion. So going back to this detail, we see just by looking at it that a little less than half of the wall section is supported directly by the bridge deck, and a little more than half of the wall is overhanging the bridge. The end result would be that if this single location of reinforcing steel every 12 inches along the length of the wall had corroded apart, there would be a tendency for the wall to turn over and fall over the side of the bridge. So a moment, as it's called in engineering, a net resultant overturning force that's acting on the bridge at all times that's resisted in tension by the connection of this reinforcing steel from the parapet wall into the bridge deck. And if that connection is eliminated through corrosion or impact or some other activity, some other force, this wall is going to tumble over the side of the bridge, which we know was the end result on April 24th, 2026. Here's some news footage that shows the attachment of these Amtrak barrier walls, these electrical barrier walls that were installed in the late 1990s, early 2000s at the direction of Amtrak. And you can see that this barrier wall just simply bolts to the parapet wall. That detail that I showed you earlier from the 1960s was for the parapet wall as it existed from 1965 up until the time of the installation of these Amtrak barrier walls, again in the late 90s, early 2000s. I'm going to play a couple of news stories for you, and they included some segments of interviews that I did. I conducted 2 interviews on Monday, the few days after this partial bridge collapse. One was with Kayla Fish with WPRI. The other was with Molly Levine from WJAR. So let's play these real quick.
Casey Jones is a Kansas engineer who examines infrastructure issues across the country on his popular YouTube channel. But Jones, who has been critical of RIDOT over the Washington Bridge crisis, says engineers should have a working theory as to what happened.
I think it's fair to say that, hey, this is the initial indication we have. It's not final, it's preliminary, but this is what we think. But to not have or not present what the early thinking is, I don't think is acceptable.
As we sit here today on May 1st, 2026, the time of recording here, RIDOT officials still have not stated what they suspect happened with this wall collapse. And clearly they must have an idea of what happened. I have no doubt that they know exactly what happened, as a matter of fact, because they are going out immediately and throughout this week have installed additional reinforcement to the other 7 Amtrak barrier walls that are installed on RIDOT bridges. But I think the concern extends far beyond just these 7 or 8 bridges with these Amtrak barriers. And I'm going to explain that here a little bit later in the video. Let's play this next segment from WJAR.
Known critic of RIDOT following the Washington Bridge fiasco, Casey Jones challenges transportation leaders.
The way it broke off looked like a very clean break, suggesting of basically a plane there of separation between the bottom of the parapet wall and the bridge decks.
Let's go back and look at some of these Google Street View photos. This is going north on this ramp. Obviously, this is prior to the wall collapse. And the wall that collapses on the south side of the bridge, so to the left of these photos. And we can see a problem right away that the routine inspections wouldn't have access to the location of the attachment of that single reinforcing bar that's, I say single, there's one every 12 inches along the length of this bridge along the wall. Those bars are not visible for inspection unless there was some destructive testing done during the bridge inspections. And there's no evidence that such destructive testing was done. So you have no idea what's going on with that reinforcing steel inside the parapet wall connecting to the bridge deck. Another thing we notice from this photo is there's no drainage on the bridge deck. So snow, ice, salt during the winter is all going to accumulate and stay ponded right up against the base of this parapet wall. And so we've already seen from that construction detail, there's a cold joint there. There's no way to really waterproof that connection. So it's not at all surprising or implausible that water would seep below the contact of the parapet wall right on top of the bridge deck and just sit there and corrode that single reinforcing bar, single, but one every 12 inches along the length of the wall over decades. From the previous inspection photos, we also see evidence of numerous collisions with cars and trucks up against the guardrail and the parapet wall. Let's play some of these prior statements from acting RIDOT Director Bob Rocchio.
Why do you believe that it was the Amtrak barrier that came down and brought this concrete with it and not the other way around?
Just from my engineering knowledge, I know that there's those electrification barriers are much wider in the wind load that is placed on that. The area of that shield is much for the wind load, to take the wind load, is much larger than on our parapet.
TF Green recorded Friday night's wind at under 10 miles per hour.
Again, we have RIDOT making statements that appears to be wholly unsupported by the available information. I disagree with Mr. Rocchio's statement that it was the Amtrak barrier that caused the collapse. It's clear to me that looking at that wall section, that if the reinforcing bars corrode away, there's going to be a net force, a resultant force, that's going to tend to overturn the parapet wall from the bridge deck to over the side without having these additional loads on it. Now, could these loads over time, wind loading on the Amtrak barrier, vehicle impacts, that sort of thing, cyclic loading with traffic going over it decade after decade, could that have contributed to deterioration and degradation of that reinforcing connection? Undoubtedly. But again, I think if you break enough of those reinforcing bars, the configuration of that wall such that it's going to go over the side of the bridge, and it's just going to take the Amtrak barrier wall with it. It's not a situation, in my view, where the Amtrak wall initiated the failure. And I like what was pointed out there. That was Molly Levine's segment, that records indicate on the Friday, April 24th, where this wall collapse occurred, the area had just experienced very light winds, less than 10 miles an hour. And at one of the earlier press conferences this week, Acting Director Rocchio indicated that there was no construction activity that could have or would have initiated this wall failure.
There's no indications that any work happened on or adjacent to that bridge that would have caused this.
RIDOT is working to determine the cause. We do not want to speculate.
Doesn't require speculation. It requires good engineering judgment to tell the public after your initial assessment what you think happened so that you can implement corrective actions as necessary to retrofit the other bridges. And again, we're talking a week later here and it hasn't happened. RIDOT has a ramp closure website. There's a link in the description, and they continue to post additional inspection reports and inspection photos to their website. As I pointed out in a previous video, I wish they would post this wall detail. I also think they should post the detail for the fix or the remediation work that they're doing for similar walls in this location or in their system, and they haven't done that. One of these additional inspection reports shows, this is Bridge 660. I just did a cursory look at these additional reports, and 5 pages in to the photos for this inspection report, you could see significant deterioration and degradation of this parapet wall. And you see the Amtrak electrical barrier farther down the road here, but look at the snow, ice, and salt that's accumulated up against the parapet wall. And as a number of you pointed out in the comments to my previous video, you strongly suspect a corrosion issue associated with this parapet wall collapse, this partial bridge collapse, and I agree. And to the extent that this was a known vulnerability, I think RIDOT's got their hands full, because from what I understand, this type of parapet wall was more or less a standard wall design in the late 50s and early to mid 1960s. So how many of these bridges does RIDOT have? Whether or not there's an Amtrak barrier attached to it, I think it's still vulnerable to this type of failure due to corrosion. And we know RIDOT has extensive problems with corrosion for bridges throughout the state. I mean, that's what led to the underlying problems with the Washington Bridge and its closure and efforts to replace it that are ongoing as we speak. So again, I want to thank that anonymous source that sent me that drawing detail. RIDOT, please confirm whether or not that detail represents the wall installation that was done here at this ramp where the wall eventually failed here last Friday. Provide the detail for what you're doing to retrofit these other bridges. I've got several pending APRA requests. RIDOT's been slow to fulfill them, but I'll continue to follow up on those requests. Again, I appreciate all of you who've contributed to Buy Me a Coffee. I use that money to support these public records requests because typically I have to pay for retrieval of these records, which I don't think is right, but that's what they do in Rhode Island. I also want to thank the channel members and those of you who've contributed to Super Thanks, additional great ways to support the channel. So stay tuned, everyone. There'll be further updates.